I'm Marco Geratana from IE University. I'm the Assistant Program Chair of the Knowledge Innovation Division, and it's a pleasure for me to be here, and so good morning and good Sunday. This is one of the most important tradition of our IG group, and I think one of the most important tradition of the SMS conference. This foundational interview was introduced in 2011, so was the first interview, by an idea of Gabriel Sulansky from INSEAD, and since then has become one of the cornerstone of our knowledge innovation interest group. Just to give you a little bit the picture of the process, as usually the selection of the scholar invited is the result of a discussion and voting among the group leadership committee every year. And this year we are really honored to have an incredible scholar, Rashri, who graciously accepted our invitation to participate in this event. In this event also tradition is essential. And the tradition dictates that two PhD students will lead the conversation with our scholar. We have here Sonali from IE University, who is working on a thesis on resource redeployment. And we have here Patrick from Bocconi University, whose topic of interest is company litigation. Say that, thank you again to Rashid for participating and accept our offer to be the Foundational Scholar of the Year, and take it away.
Thank you, Professor Marco, for the warm introduction. It is my immense pleasure today to talk with Professor Rajshri Agrawal, sharing her experiences as an author, reviewer, and editor. Through this interview, we hope to capture the essence of Rajshri's research, while at the same time, we hope to depict her journey, which is also her destination as a lifelong learner. Welcome, Rajshri.
Thank you, Sonali.
And as Marco previously mentioned, my name is Patrick Smith. I think today's session will be very beneficial for junior faculty in the room because we're going to learn about the research methodologies, the personal attributes, and the procedural efforts that it takes to become a successful researcher. And on that note, Rajshri, once again, thank you for coming.
I appreciate, is this on? No? Okay, is this on? No?
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
No.
No?
Yeah, we can try.
Okay.
Yeah.
I only teach about technology. I don't necessarily know how to use it. Thank you so much to the Knowledge and Innovation IG for including me in this honor. I am delighted, and thank you so much, Sonali and Patrick, for doing all of the work and the heavy lifting to be the interviewees.
Well, our work is done. Now it's up to you to fulfill it.
No pressure, right?
So our first question today is very straightforward, I'm sure. You were born as the daughter of an entrepreneur in India. How did you end up in academia?
Yes, so, you know, my father was the rags to riches quintessential story of an entrepreneur that was a serial enterprises all through. And as I reflect back on him, I think that he had a paradox that he didn't really solve for himself. In as much as in his professional life, he was the quintessential enterprising leader. Agency was important. You chart your own destiny. But in his personal life, he was very much a traditionalist. And so as a daughter growing up in that environment, there were very clear, you want to be thinking for yourself, but within the boundaries that I set for you. You want to be active in terms of debate competitions, excel in education, but don't think that you're going to have a career outside of the house. And I grew up in that paradox. So for me, surprisingly, education was my escape hatch. I was, Pratiti's here, she remembers our college days. I was the quintessential tomboy, if you will, riding motorcycles, sitting out in the cafeteria, rather than going into the classes, right? We bunked classes like nobody's business. And so I relied on my intelligence to coast through, but I really never I thought research was so boring. I mean, who would ever want to do that, right? But at a critical point in my life, I had to create an either or for myself. Either I follow in the ideas that my father had for my life, or I follow the other aspect that he had taught me to be, which is to think for myself, to be willing to act on my own beliefs and values, even if it meant that I alienate him. And so given that, I really had a choice of having to accept his life, or make it out on my own. And in India at that time, if I was making it out on my own, I really didn't have the capabilities. So again, like I said, education was my escape hatch. So I applied for a PhD in the United States. And because I loved teaching. Teaching was my passion. Loved the idea of learning, educating. I was 10 years old, and I would play pretend teacher to a set of imaginary students, like empty chairs, but I was going to teach them math, right? And so I was able to leverage that aspect about me and then come for a PhD, because that meant that I had an assistantship, so I could fund myself. And I guess I am my father's daughter. So I am an intellectual entrepreneur, and that's what I like to think of myself.
So were there some academic figures in your life, who were important to you when you started off your academic career? Given the fact that failures and rejection is something which is inevitable in academics, so these people who sort of pushed you through a certain period of uncertainty.
Yeah. So as I said, I coasted all the way through my master's in India. But when I came to the United States and I had to do my PhD, now I couldn't afford to be out there in cafeterias, right? Now I was really struggling because I had to master and learn those concepts that I hadn't really gotten a firm grasp on. And so the first 2 years where it was coursework was still easy because it required me to consume knowledge. And I was good at consuming knowledge and regurgitating it. So the first 2 years I coasted, no problems. I think it was in that third year where I now talk to my PhD students. And each of us, I have noticed, experienced this one way or the other. I call it the valley of the lost. When you're moving from being a consumer of knowledge to a producer of knowledge. And I didn't know how to be a producer. And so at that point in time, I think there were two influential figures, one negative and one positive. And let me go back and forth with each of them. Michael Gort, who became my advisor, had a reputation of being very, very choosy among the students that he would take. In fact, while I have been able to and have the fortune of having at least one or two students every year, every other year to be my advisee, he had the reputation of picking up maybe one or two across a 5-year span, right? And so I really wanted to work with him because innovation, entrepreneurship, upward mobility, these were already things that were grabbing me. Again, given my father's influence as an entrepreneur. And he was doing work on evolution of industries from formation all the way to evolution. So I really wanted to work with him. But I was told that he only picks very few students. And so the assistant director at that time gave me some very sound advice. She said, Michael matches effort for effort. If he sees that you're putting in effort, he will match it. If he sees you're not putting in effort, he'll match that too. Now, fortunately, Michael agreed to take me on as his student. But it was still on me to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And I was struggling. I mean, third year, I had this interactive influence of entry and innovation, right? And I presented it in a student brown bag. And this is where I still remember this as a very formative experience. One of the assistant professors took me out for lunch the next day. And he was trying to give me feedback. I just wasn't getting it. Basically, at the end of it, he just said, Rashri, you have nothing. Right? You've got a whole bunch of words, but there's nothing here. And that really set me back. Now, one of the committee members that I had asked to be on it, this is the negative influence. Not so nice, not so kind either. And he knew I was struggling. So I'm in the RA room, and he's talking with other faculty members, very deliberately knowing that I'm going to hear him. And he says, you know, these PhD students, I just don't get it. They keep whining and complaining about the fact that they don't have an idea. On the top of my hand, I could give 5 or 6 ideas right out there. I just don't get it. And I'm thinking one idea is all I need for my dissertation, right? Now, Michael helped me through that. And, you know, he was that positive, influential figure. I went through a very hard divorce at that time that I wasn't expecting either. And I remember a crucial moment in his office where he said, well, we need to be thinking about your job market and your prospects out there. You can see where he cared. He cared about me as a person, not just the dissertation that I was writing as a product. And he said, so we need to figure out what are your intentions, you know, what are your constraints in terms of geography given your husband. And I just burst out crying, right? I just lost it. I said, well, I don't have to worry about that, right? And he said, well, what can I do? And I remember that moment because I said, Michael, what I really need for you to do is help me focus. Focus on getting my dissertation done, focus on getting this writing. And he said, done. So he became my intellectual father. And when Rob and I got married, my second marriage, the love of my life, Michael gave me away. And it's a very special relationship.
Now, you graduated with a PhD in economics. However, you've transitioned into the management field. What motivated that change?
You know, I was attracted to economics and industrial organization because I wanted to study innovation and entrepreneurship as the engines of upward mobility of individuals all the way through social and economic growth. So it made sense, and especially as a student of Michael, carrying on and thinking about these industry dynamics, well, what are the underlying factors on it? So even though I was in economics, my focus was very much on firms. By the way, I had a choice of going into labor economics or into industrial organizational economics. And that choice was influenced by the fact that Michael was, of course, doing the innovation research at a time when game theory was big, right? But he was thinking very much about these endogenous processes through which industries evolve. So in part it was that, but in part it was also the fact that at that point in time, labor economics was a lot more on gender, on, you know, human capital was important, but it seemed to be that case. And I didn't want to be stereotyped, honestly, as a woman who was doing gender labor economics. And so that was actually a reason for me not to go in there. But once I did choose that, I wanted to study the role of firms. And that was what my dissertation was about, firm entry and firm exit and firm strategy, but at a very econ, macro, broad level. And then I realized that I didn't care about, industries don't make decisions, firms do. And then of course, once I moved into strategy, people would correct me correctly saying firms don't make decisions, individuals do. And so I naturally progressed from strategy into entrepreneurship, into examining entrepreneurial leaders of both startups and established firms and the decisions that they do. And now I think about individuals make decisions within firms as contexts and organizations, and as they evolve, so do industries and so do economies. So I think my research focus essentially has stayed the same, but the levels of analysis, the types of questions, in fact, I now talk about the fact that maybe we borrow too much from economics. And as I went deeper, that focus back on labor economics and human capital rekindled. But the way I think about it, I think we've done ourselves injustice. Take it, for example, the concept of human capital. What do we think about there? Human capital is investments that you make so that you can reap the benefits in terms of monetary incentives, right? Wages, income, how's that going to go up? But, you know, we're much more than our capabilities. And we care much more than just about making money. Don't get me wrong. I am your quintessential entrepreneur capitalist. Money is good. I love the money that I make. But that's not the driving force, right? Ed Snyder, who's a later mentor, and I have the fortune of being the director of the center that bears his name, he often said money's the reward, not the reason. So over time, I've also, and strategy and entrepreneurship gives you this opportunity. You know, every discipline makes certain assumptions about human behavior. But when we operate on a day-to-day basis, it's not like I'm going to wear my economics hat today and I'm going to wear my sociology hat tomorrow, and maybe day after tomorrow I'm going to be thinking about my psychological motivations and so on. We come as a whole person, and strategy entrepreneurship allows us to examine individuals as whole people, interacting in social environments and organizational environments. And so what I've really appreciated is borrowing from psychology, from sociology, even as I build on my econ base. And that's been my journey.
Thank you. So Rajshri, you are an extremely prolific writer. I think I counted over 100 papers of yours on Google Scholar while preparing for this interview. So how do you maintain such a relentless pace in publishing papers?
My husband and my daughter say I'm a workaholic. I strongly disagree with them. And I think it's a fight I'm not going to win or lose, right? I love what I do. And I think that that's one of the things. So by the way, after that being in the Valley of the Lost, and after I did these initial research forays, and then I did figure out what I wanted to say, and I did have something to say, as opposed to that professor that says you got nothing. I did have something. I got a dissertation. But one of the things that I think that I learned at that early days with Michael is to focus on skills and capabilities to be a producer, not just the product. And so that passion for research was born. And so I became very curious. In every paper that I did, there were 2 or 3 questions, you know, and one of the things that I realized 5 years down the road, by the way, from that professor that was neither kind nor nice, I already had 6 or 7 questions that I could give my PhD students, right? Because the more you know what you don't know. And so, you know, and there was this intellectual curiosity. So the fact that I love what I do, and then I found out that I was good at it, created this virtuous spiral in me, because my self-esteem increased when I realized I was good at research. And so I wanted to invest in doing even more of it. And then when I invested in doing more of it, I became better at it. And so there was this virtual spiral. But I would be very remiss if I said that this relentless pace of publishing, as you call it, was mine and mine alone. Every step of the way, from Michael initially to David Aldrich, who became and Barry Bayes, who became senior faculty that I worked with, very quickly transitioned to working with peers, Raji Chimbadi, M.B. Sarkar. They were foundational to not only what I focused on, but how I did research. And then later on, my PhD students, right, the junior co-authors, junior colleagues like Raj, then there was Glenn, there was Charlie Williams, Sonali Shah joined in too. So in every one of these processes, and then my PhD students, Martin was there, Maka was there, Audra more recently, I see her here now too. What I realized is that I completely believe in the trader principle. I completely believe in what I call the trader Sudoku. So there's me and things that I want to do, but I want to be working with people that I feel that I have alignment with in terms of work values, but are also complementary in my capabilities. And so that then makes the research enterprise so much more productive, because that's where synergies bloom in team authorships. And I have opinions about, well, what's your fixed effect, right? Or what's your contribution in it? I think I might have written 3 papers solo authored throughout my life. And they weren't that good, honestly, right? My best papers are my co-authored papers. And why? Because when you have people that are completely aligned to that purpose of doing good work, bringing your complementary capabilities, having the work ethic, you actually brainstorm. I had fights with MB, right? I have fights with Maka, right? And those are productive fights, because what that allows you to do in that brainstorming process is really challenge assumptions that you're holding. And through that, not only are you more productive, you actually all get to do the things that you enjoy doing, and the other person with complementary capabilities does the things that they enjoy doing. And then together you're brainstorming. So it's not like a complete division of labor. There are things that you do separately and then the things that you do apart. So all of those papers, one of the things I want you to notice about them is they're all co-authored. So why am I so prolific? It's because of these very value-creating, valuable team relationships.
Well, let's build off of that a little bit, because as you mentioned, many of your, or most of your papers are co-authored, but not only that, you write 3, 4, 5 papers with the same groups of co-authors. So this next question is a 2-parter, building off that. First, how do you identify somebody that you want to work with in the first place? And then second, how do you maintain such a good relationship over time?
Yeah, so how do I identify it? Like I said, I seek people that are not just complementary, but they're also, value aligned. Now, what do I mean by value aligned, right? They care about the same questions that I do, but they may be coming at it in a different way. They're curious about it. When I was a junior scholar, there was a distribution of work where Michael had the wisdom, the view of, what's important, what are good research questions, how do you frame a paper and stuff. Whereas I did the grunt work, right? I did all of the data analysis, I did the data compilation, I worked with him, I created first drafts, I learned as we went along. Now it has swapped, as it should be too, right? Because I'm now more in a situation where I can see the bigger picture, the questions and stuff. So there is that complementarity that I seek first and foremost. But then I also seek that intellectual curiosity, and I definitely seek the work ethic, because getting things done is very important. And one of the things that I've often seen people do is not only get lost in that valley of the lost and have their wells of anxiety overcome them, but sometimes it's this perfectionism aspect, right? You're afraid to send the paper done because it's not perfect. And so seeking people and then helping them and mentoring them now in this stage, like Michael mentored me before, is very important as it relates to, well, where is it that I can leverage in my junior scholars, PhD students that I'm looking for now? Where is it that I can leverage their intellectual curiosity, their latest vintage of, statistical methods, any kinds of things, right? So over the time that you also talked about, I've become a very multi-method person. I've gone all the way from quantitative to qualitative to historical case studies. But all of it relies and requires on the other person matching effort for effort. So I'm looking for that person to match effort for effort. In fact, I think that matching effort for effort has become something that all of my PhD students, one way or the other, repeat back to me. Because it has become so much of a mainstay in our relationships.
So I think you have already answered a part of what I'm going to ask you next. Rajshri, your journey, it depicts a scholarly life that is filled with very meaningful relationships with your advisors, with your co-authors, and even your PhD students. What qualities do you look for in a PhD student when you start working with them?
I've already there are no differences. So I don't think of my PhD students as anything but my co-authors or collaborators. So the same principles that relate, and now I end up working mostly with my PhD students as new co-authors, right? So the same principle applies. But I do want to pick up on this meaningful relationships aspect. I'll share a funny story with you. My daughter, who's decided to be an academic, but not in strategy, by the way, right? She's going to go into OB. Very recently, she shared this story with me about how she was talking to her housemate who had just had one of these really deep connecting moments with her advisor. And the way that my daughter explained it to me, Tara talked to her about it and said, well, I don't know what to make out of this. You know, there are supposed to be professional boundaries here. And I was able to be really vulnerable with my advisor, and he responded back. I mean, as Alicia said, she was feeling psychological whiplash. I didn't even know what that meant, psychological whiplash, right? But what she really said to me is, the question that her housemate was asking her is, well, what boundaries should we be setting in these professional relationships? And so Alicia says, Tara, let me explain to you the meaning of boundaries for my mother. She has none. So again, it may be that, and I mean this obviously in the positive sense, right? And some of it is imprinting from my relationship with Michael. But if I'm looking around and I'm seeing the people that are giggling and smiling right now, these are my co-authors. These are my PhD students, right? And we connect, we've become friends in a very deep sense of the word. We're there for each other through personal and professional ups and downs. We celebrate each other's achievements, and we're there for each other to bolster ourselves in dark moments. And that appears, right? Because you bring your whole life to your work. I don't understand this concept of boundaries, at least for me. That's not what works.
Now, with all of the research collaborations that you have, especially with your PhD students, the acknowledgement of work might come up as an issue. Do you have any beliefs on how the attribution of effort should be given out in the papers that you write?
Yeah, how long do you want me to talk about that? There is a very classic paper in economics that talks about team production functions and how team production functions are actually multiplicative. And it's very difficult, especially when we were talking about this earlier aspects, right? That you're bringing complementary expertise, but you're also bringing aligned values, and you're producing new research, right? You're producing new knowledge. It's very difficult to figure out, well, whose idea was it? Whose effort, when the brainstorming is where the value is being created. So, even going back to Michael, I used to often say this: if I were to just look at raw counting of hours, the Agarwal and Gort papers were very much 90% my time, 10% Michael's time. But if I look at the value that was offered, it was definitely 50-50, right? But I know that in our profession, we care deeply about this. And in fact, author attribution matters immensely. I tend to not sweat the small stuff myself, and I know that, and I get upset about, well, you know, if my students, for instance, have 4 or 5 papers with me, and they're coming up for tenure, well, this is Rajshri, not you, right? What's your work in this? And at the end of the day, I feel like I have learned a lot more from my students than they've learned from me, so I reject that premise to begin with. But recognizing this, one of the things that I started to do very early on is, my last name is Agarwal. My married name is Trinetti. I was strategic in economics, where I kept Agarwal, not Trinetti, so that I could be alphabetically first. But I think that that hasn't served me well, because more recently what I've done is always in these kinds of collaborations where I do believe that effort cannot be divided, I always have the junior author go first, because that matters. And so you'll see a very distinct change in the papers that I've written, where many of them I'm coming in last. And I think that that's something that we need to do to acknowledge the realities of the profession that we're in, but I wish we didn't obsess so much about what's each person's individual attribution. I believe in the reveal preference approach, right? Why would, you said, I've always done 3 to 4 projects at least with people, right? Why is it that we want to continue to work together if we really didn't believe that the other person added value, right? So that is more of a reveal preference view of what are the attributions of the authors, as opposed to, well, what did I do? What did you do? And I think it creates really negative dynamics in the author team. It destroys working relationships if the first thing that you're doing in talking about it is, well, let's talk about order of authorship, right? And who did what and what. That just creates a negative dynamic that I don't want to dilute a very meaningful experience.
We would now like to talk about Rajshri's recent experience at the University of Maryland and how it has influenced her career. So Rajshri, how has your career on a day-to-day basis evolved now that you have the added responsibilities of being the academic director as well as the chair of the Strategy and Entrepreneurship Department?
Well, I'm not the chair. I won't commit that kind of administration. So I have a chair in strategy and entrepreneurship, chaired professorship, but I do lead, and I'm the founding director of the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets. And I actually did that as a very deliberate, what's the next stage of my life? Right, my identity will always be that of a researcher, as a scholar. And that's the reason I won't commit administration, right? That's why I don't want to be chair or dean or go down that route. But for me, being a center director, especially one which was generously supported by Ed Snyder, allowed me to truly integrate my values with my research. What do I mean by that? If I care about innovation and entrepreneurship, why do I do that? Because I truly believe that these are the engines of human flourishing. At a very deep individual level, it unleashes our ability to be the best that we can be. So when I thought about what is it that is, after I've achieved career success, but even as I'm doing that, what were the questions that inspired me? It was truly about enabling upward mobility. And I remember I did tell you that I love teaching. So even as I was doing the research that we focused on, I always was interested in creating programs that enable that lifelong learner. So, when I was in Champaign, Illinois, I was a co-director of a STEM middle school program that allowed them to harness their enterprising ability through science. Later on, I started to create the SELF program. Many of my colleagues actually have sent their kids. Amina's daughter, Safia, was the latest person that I had the honor of having for the 3 weeks in my high school program. And this is because they're at the cusp of adulthood. They have to think about how it is that they can become independent thinkers themselves, but we need to provide them frameworks to do so. And our research has something to bear with it. So being the director of the center gave me both the resources and the freedom to create new programs for high school all the way through executive education. And that has taken a lot of my time, but it's very meaningful work because now I know that I'm enabling people's upward mobility. The research is being put into practice. Similarly, the reason I started writing Forbes articles, it's because I sincerely believe that our research has something to say. And it was good for me to think about the translation, the applications. So on a day-to-day basis, I get far less time than I would like to do the research itself, but I get enough. And I think that all three of them synergize with each other quite well. And again, I believe in a team production model. So in every one of these endeavors, I'm constantly thinking about who are my Trader Sudoku partners. And I use Trader Sudoku because there are 9 parts to trade. Me and you, my actions and your actions, but underlying it is what's our common purpose? What are your aspirations? What are my aspirations? What are my abilities? What are your abilities? So in all of this, I still do the same thing, very much a team production model.
Now, to build on that comment about aspirations and motivations, if we go back, many of the other people that have received this honor graduated from Harvard, Yale, Stanford. You received your PhD from the University of Buffalo, and your first job in academia was at the University of Central Florida. Yet here you are today, co-editor of SMJ, a contributor to Forbes magazine, one of the most well-known scholars in your field. Have you always had the ambition and the want to be at the top of your field?
Yes.
Okay. well, okay, we'll build on that. Let's get a question out of this. So, or has your confidence grown as
Yes.
you've become more and more through this and recognized, okay, I'm good at this, I can reach the top of the field? Is that something you knew from the beginning, or is that something that year over year you've kind of grown as a person and understood, okay, this is someplace I could end up in the future?
Yeah. So, as I said to you before, right, I started off with education as my escape hatch. I started off coming from India at a time when, I date myself, we didn't have the internet at that time, right? So it was largely relying on books, figuring out where to go. And I also said to you that I didn't really apply myself. So not surprisingly, I didn't necessarily get into the best schools. And therein lies the difference, right? Good schools are correlates of quality, but are not necessarily synonymous with quality. And especially if you have information frictions or times when people aren't putting in their best effort that matches what their ability is, then you're not going to get to where you need to go, right? So I got into the best school that I could, which was Buffalo. And based on also not knowing which were the good schools, right? So coming from India, I didn't necessarily know this distinction between Ivy versus not. And of course, I had to deal with a lot of anxieties that I've already told you about. So did I always have the agency and the drive? Yes. Did I have the confidence and the ability, or even this, I need to reach this highest status that I can? No. Right? Those became part of that journey. And again, it's a step-by-step process. Originally, when I graduated from Buffalo, the best I could hope for was a teaching institution, especially because if you didn't graduate from the top 20 institutions, let alone 25th or 50th, in economics, forget about getting into a high-quality research institution, right? But I was fortunate to work with Michael. And then at UCF, I was really fortunate that that's where I got my start, because that's where they were aspiring to be a Research One institution, so they gave us the resources. And they hired well. So I talked about MB and Raj. They were very critical to my journey. And I remember then that when I was interviewing at Illinois, I presented a paper that was co-authored with both of them. And I gave this presentation and I came back because I was very nervous. I was so sure that I wouldn't get that job, right? if you're looking at ranking, so much higher than UCF, and why would they even look at me? And I came back, and I remember having this conversation with Raj. I said, you know, Raj, when I presented, there was not a single question that I didn't anticipate. Or the quality of the conversations were one where I felt that I did pretty good. And I remember Raj saying that there was an expectation disconfirmation that happened out there. I had expected the distance between my researching abilities and my papers to be so much different than the ones of my new colleagues at Illinois when they hired me, right? But it wasn't. And so that was a huge confidence booster, right? And so at every stage, so long as you're willing to push yourself, Ed Locke, who was a professor at University of Maryland, is very well known for his goal-setting theory, right? That if you set high aspirations, you will reach up to match them. And I sincerely believe that. And I do believe in this, what does success look like for me now? It's being able to say, I love what I do and I'm good at it. And so long as we follow that, I think status comes. You got to put in the work, though. And when I was willing to put in the work, I was able to get to the status that others already had associated with them by graduating from Ivy League schools.
So of late, there has been, questions which are raised by scientists in terms of the way statistics is being conducted in scientific research, be it, the tests that are being reported in journal publications, or the reliability of the statistical models. And we all know, that the null hypothesis significance tests are the mainstay of empirical research, with the p-value being the most important component of all of it. And there have been obvious instances of data phishing and p-values and, p-hacking. So what is your take on replicating original studies in a different context? Do you think it will help us preserve the integrity of scientific research?
So, I talked about Michael as one of my first mentors. But when I moved into strategy, I think there are two people that I really grew very close to and emulated and looked up to. Sid Winter was one of them, and he was very positive and very nurturing. But the other person that I want to give complete credit to is Connie, and she's sitting here, right? And we were talking about author attribution. May I share this story, Connie? She doesn't know what's coming, so it's like, share it, it's your interview, but what am I getting into? But she was very generous in that the first time that I presented at Wharton, my paper on employee entrepreneurship, she was in the room, and I remember she and Sid, she's asking Sid, who's this person, kind of a thing, right? But she was very generous, and she agreed to meet with me in the next academy and willing to read a paper that I had given her and give really substantive comments. And you never know, I don't think I've ever told you how much that meant to me, Connie. But during this conversation, and here's the funny part of it, she's like, you're looking at something that's very important here, in as much as industry life cycle evolution is something, of course, that I resonate with. But as you're thinking about this conditioning effect, especially on experience, I'm reminded of this paper by David Aldrich, who looked at something similar. And I said, yes, that was Agarwal and Aldrich, Journal of Industrial Economics. So part of what I'm trying to say to you out here, it's natural to attribute a paper with the person that you're familiar with. And that often goes to the senior scholars, right? But what I appreciated about Connie then is her generosity towards junior scholars, right? And then when I said, yes, it's there, you both laughed, right? So this, as it relates to attribution and why I don't believe that order of authorship is really one that will still solve the puzzle in terms of who contributed what. But coming more substantively to the question that you asked, I think SMJ and editors such as Connie and Will Mitchell and Alfonso Gambardella and Sendil Etharaj, the ones that came before us, they really, even before this issue has now become they were first movers in strategic management. They said, no, p-hacking is there, and we don't want to encourage or perverse incentivize people from doing the things that are going to be recognized as okay and acceptable. And it's not necessarily an issue that's a problem, it's a problem, of course, of the integrity and the honesty of the scholars, but a lot of it is on us. As journals, what are we setting up in incentive mechanisms and structures? What are we rewarding? So, Connie also says novelty is often overrated. It's not that novelty is not important, but there are so many other things that are important with it. And I completely buy into those values. So at SMJ, one of the big reasons why I took on the position of being a co-editor, and I agreed, is because I felt like it was my job to now pay it forward and make sure that I'm continuing to honor those values and continuing for our journals to really recognize this. And by the way, yes, does fraud occur? Yes. I'm much more optimistic. I think there's a distribution. I think that these are still rare events. Most of us who are in this profession are in it because we love what we do, right? And we care about the research enterprise. Otherwise, honestly, with all of our talents and our knowledge, we would be CEOs of major enterprises right now making a lot more money. So to the extent that we really care about using, creating new knowledge, I would like to believe that all of us do the right thing, largely, and that we need to change on the margin these incentives to help us do even better research.
And we are running towards the end of the session, and we would like to save some time for Q&A afterwards. So I think this will be the final question that Sonali and I have for you, and it's a bit selfish. So Sonali and I will be graduating soon, and we would like a little bit of advice that you may have for people soon to be on the job market, junior researchers, anything that you may be able to provide, and I guess save a few minutes for Q&A after. So.
Yeah. So I actually, I told you about the fact that I created this high school program. And in that, using strategic management and entrepreneurship principles, I created a framework called CEO of Me, which is fundamentally, what are the 4 fundamental questions that every CEO should ask? And are you asking that of yourself? What's my purpose? What does success look like? What's my value proposition? And whom do I trade with? And as you've noticed, I've talked a lot about why trade relationships are so important. And we often think about these trades as transactions, but there's so much more to it. And so as a junior scholar, I think I would basically underscore many of the things that I have seen be successful for myself and for all of the people that I have been able to cheer from the sidelines in their successes. And it's really, it's not this, follow your passion. Yeah, but what if your passion is on things that you're not good at, right? Then you're not necessarily solving that problem. So it's really thinking about that intersection of questions that you love doing, that you really want to know the answer to, and then making sure that you're complementing it with the right capabilities in yourself and in others. The other thing that I did that worked for me, and I've seen work for others, is actively learning as you're growing, right? So every research project for me, it was never a one paper deal. I always embarked on programs. So there were at least 4 to 5 papers across a particular stream, and then there was another built up on it. But in each of these, the investments of resources, it was about capitalizing them and harnessing them to make sure that you were fully doing justice to the questions that didn't get answered in that first paper that you wrote, but while you were doing it, you learned about the questions that could come up. And then I guess this matching effort for effort, finding good trade partners. So networking, not because you want tenure or promotion, but because you're seeking to create meaningful relationships. So, I think it was Saraswati that said it in one of the presentations. We often, because our careers are at stake, right? And this profession, which other profession pits a young junior scholar with the most senior one in competition for journal space? right? That's what we're doing. And so, but ideas matter, and what you bring to the table are fresh ideas, fresh views, your own enterprise, your own energy. And that's huge, because that's what we seek as now more senior scholars, right? We're seeking to learn from you. So stop thinking in terms of hierarchies and start thinking in terms of equal relationships. I may know more than you of what has already been done, but as it comes to new knowledge, we're on equal footing, right? And your energy, your passions, your questions may inspire thoughts and sparks in me. So we're truly partners, equal partners in that fundamental sense. So seek those relationships, but don't come at it at a position of deficit. Come at it in as much as I have value to offer you, and then, of course, follow through with that value, and then seek the same value from others. And this is across all relationships, co-author relationships, colleague relationships, relationships as reviewers with editors in the academic community. I think that that trader principle, that at a fundamental level, you're independent equals that have value to offer, and that's why you're together, would be the one advice I would give you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions today. Now we'd like to turn to the audience for questions.
So thank you very much. So now it's the time to open the floor to questions, but also since we know that there are here actually co-authors and PhD, if you want to share some moments or episodes, you are more than welcome. But before doing that, I would like to ask for an applause for our two PhD students. They were very nervous about this, but I think they do an incredible job, no?
They didn't let on that they were nervous, even when they grilled me in the preceding time when we were preparing for this.
So please.
Thank you so much for that wonderful interview. I have a possibly tangential question, and I ask you this because I obtained a lot of insights from the way you think as scholar, and the mentor-mentee relationship that you have so well described. So my question to you is regarding that. What is your take on a second PhD if you think that you have not obtained what you obtained and what you give to your students? What is your take on a second PhD? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so, the graduate school dean at Illinois once said something that I found very profound. He said, in our PhD programs, we focus on the product, the dissertation, the papers that come out of it. What we really should be focusing on is the producer, so that we are graduating people that are capable of writing 10, if not more, dissertations through their lifetime. And so whether if you feel like you've been deficient in your training or in your knowledge, you could pursue a formal one. What I did it informally, right? So when I had to move from economics into strategy, I remember Joe Mahoney saying, well, if you know how to play squash, racquetball is easy. Not true. I'll tell you this, I was a great squash player. My husband, not as mobile as me, would stand in the middle and make me run around in racquetball, and I would lose, right? So there was a significant amount of relearning as it relates to moving from economics into strategy. And so that was my second PhD, if you will, right? There was a significant amount of differences in teaching style, and I had to learn that. And then even as I moved from there into new areas of research, I had to retrain myself. So I think that whether you do it formally, like you're asking, or informally, like I did, that kind of learning is what rejuvenates yourself. And it keeps you wanting to get up in the morning with a spring in your step, wanting to look at what else have I learned, right? And so I don't think in terms of contributions, theoretical contributions, empirical contributions of the paper, in as much as, well, what did I contribute, as much as I reframed it in my head as what did I learn? What did I learn after doing this paper that I didn't already know? And for me, that is a student mentality, or retraining yourself with second formal or informal PhDs.
So thank you very much for this interview. I wanted to ask you, among your many contributions, if you were to choose 3 that you find the most important and tell us why, what would those be?
Oh, come on. That's saying among all of your babies, which one's your favorite? I mean, come on.
And yet.
And yet. Well, I would say that my after the dissertation, which kind of imprinted me, I think the paper that I wrote on employee entrepreneurship, I guess I'll answer it in this way. What are the foundational papers that I can go back to, where I said that writing this paper changed my research trajectory, right? So that paper matters because until then I was an industry evolution scholar. After that, I started to really think about the human enterprise element. And so that set the stage for me to really take individuals, their aspirations and their abilities seriously. So that would be the second piece. I think 2 others that similarly set the stage for me. One would be the work that I did with Maka when she focused on incubation, right? So that's what she taught me, that there was a period prior to time 0 first commercialization. So that opened a brand new area of inquiry around that. And then at the same time, there was also work that I was doing on entrepreneurial team formation, which got this trader Sudoku concept embedded in me, and that also has kind of cemented how I live my life. And then if I were to say the third, which is now, it's really focusing on leveraging human enterprise towards solving big problems and challenges, right? So the work that I did with Audra, for instance, and her dissertation, which really talked about how do you bring an entire unbanked population out of poverty into financial inclusion, and what is the role of private enterprise in doing that? You know, so those would be among the highlights. Again, as it relates to redefining trajectories for me and where I want to go. Okay, now I'm in trouble.
So Rajshri, I think I'm speaking on behalf of like all co-authors, all collaborators, all junior faculty, students who have benefited from your own generosity. You were talking about Connie's generosity. I think you've been a very, very good student of Connie, if we take it from that perspective. So I don't have a question, but I thought one reflection, because you were alluding to this incubation stage research. And I think a lot of like questions revolved around mentorship, how Raj approached it. So that this may be one good place for me to reflect on it. As a doctoral student, this is, I think, a shared experience across our students, that you go to Rajshri's office with 53,000 different ideas. You're looking at the databases from different perspectives, you're reading literature, sense making, but it is also the advisor's role in that, like, she guides, I think, every one of us into the process. So I probably came to you with many, many ideas, but it was you who gravitated toward that particular chart and told me, put everything else on hold and look at this. This is the deep dive. And that's, I think, the very, very valuable aspect of mentorship, the judgment that students don't have, even if they put a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the work in that high level thinking, even though it's 30 seconds our whole conversation could be career changing. So that I want to give credit, and you were talking about credit attribution. That's where the differences come in, and that it's not the number of hours, it's that a very seemingly quick sentence could be that deep. So thank you, just a reflection since you mentioned that.
Thank you, Maka.
Do you want to have a reply on this? Or?
Thank you. Is good.
Just a thank you. Other questions? So I will take the privilege to make you the last questions before closing this super interesting interview. And I want to come back to, I think, this very interesting topic of replication as an editor. So, and I want to make you a sort of provocative questions in the sense that clearly this community is pretty much pushing for this fusion or replication studies. But do you think that, let we call it battle, this battle could be fought only by this community and this group of journals? Or we need a sort of joint ventures alliance with other journals, top journals that push in this direction? And if it is so, how do you think we can orchestrate, and who can orchestrate this idea?
So replication matters. I also think that another passion project for me, as it relates to places where I would like the field to go and things to change, is this obsession that we have on writing hypotheses. And then, and I say this because this is another one of these incentive structures or structural conditions that we just artificially place on our research endeavors, which I think can be very constraining, right? So we have so equated in our profession, and this is not true in economics, it's not true in sociology, not true in many other disciplines, that the only way to write a paper is to have a theoretical upfront development where you're creating hypotheses and then you're going to show support for those hypotheses using quantitative data, if you're doing quantitative methods. If you're doing qualitative methods, then the only approach is inductive, right? That is not true. I mean, in philosophy of science, they'll tell you induction, deduction, and abduction, all three matter. And data are data, whether they're qualitative and quantitative, and can be used for all three. But we seem to have this. Now, what are the consequences of doing this, right? Let me name just a couple. One, we tell our, all of our PhD classes are using exemplar articles that have been written in this manner, right? So we know of no other system, and that's how we learn. The other thing that we end up doing is, I remember this conversation where one of our PhD students came to me in tears because another faculty member had said to them, well, what you're doing is post hoc theorizing, and that is not okay, right? And yet, in our reviews, notice that we often say, well, this is an intriguing finding that you need to develop more. Why don't you develop it and hypothesize, write a hypothesis about it, right? Now, this creates a sense that we're doing icky stuff, right? It creates guilt, it creates shame, which is not necessary. Sorry. I'm recovering from a cold here. And I guess I am passionate about the subject, right? And then the third thing that it does is put us between a rock and a hard place. The rock is we need to hypothesize causal relationships. The hard place is we don't have data or methods that would allow us to establish causality. Now what do we do? And again, we need to have non-intuitive, not just novel hypotheses, but they have to be non-obvious. They have to be non-intuitive, right? We're creating all of these shackles when we're doing research. Why? So I'm a big believer in replication because that's how we know that some things are true across contexts. They're true across samples. They matter for managers. I care about abduction because that's the process through which we create new knowledge. I mean, think about it. If the hypotheses are some things that you could have done anyways, and then you're testing, those are likely trivial. It really comes as surprises. So things that Michael taught me is, what are the data trying to tell you? Why is this important? Right? And then going back to Maka's point, across all of the data patterns, which ones are more important to study and why? That's our judgment. That requires us to interact with theory and with data back and forth. So I'm big into abduction. And again, this is where the questions-based research, 2 special issues on it, right? Because when I was in economics, my dissertation, by the way, had 0 hypotheses. I only started to write hypotheses when I became a junior faculty member in strategy and entrepreneurship. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I have gone back to writing only research, abductive research question-based. There's one that I have hypothesis in, and that one was pre-registered.
So thank you very much, and a big applause for our foundational scholar today. Thank you very much, and there is coffee now, I think. Thank you, thank you.